Hi, I'm Tony.
I'm Patrick.
Welcome to Caves of the Cross Apologetics. We're working our way through Scott Christensen's book, What About Evil? And we found ourselves in the middle of chapter 10, where he's telling us a story about stories, right? He's talking about the importance of story and how that fits into his theodicy with regard to the issue of evil, right?
And when my wife asks me what we did down here, I'll be like, I'll tell her a story about us telling stories about stories.
And so he's just kind of, giving us this distinction between a tragedy and a comedy and why both of them are important for us. And he calls this the monomyth. Right, this idea of how a story is put together. He tells us that one literary expert, Freytag, so this is called Freytag's Pyramid, has been adopted to fit most genres of fiction, whether in literature or on the screen. And so he gives us a basic outline. First, it starts with exposition. Right? And so this is where the story is set up, introducing the characters, the themes that lead to the emerging conflict. So that's the exposition portion of the story. It's a carefully designed story will develop, he tells us, the characters so that audiences are readily engaged in their lives. They identify with them, right? It endures the heroes, and of course it makes the villains appalling to us, right? So that's the exposition portion of the story. Right?
I could just go through Star Wars and be like, here's the inclusion of Darth Vader. How do you know he's bad? Because look what he did.
That's right. No, it's the music. That's right.
I mean, that helps. That helps. Yeah. So if you hear, playwrights or film or TV talk about this kind of 3-act structure, this is kind of what they're referring to, and this trinity of storytelling where you have to introduce the characters at some point in time. Darth Vader is introduced very quickly, and you understand. Okay, there's a war, there's a battle, there's people in black and people in white. Princess Leia is dressed in white. The symbolism is clear there, and only slightly after that, Luke Skywalker comes about, and you follow the journey of the characters there, where depending if you want to take the one movie or the 3 movies, you can even get the storytelling within that. And so the pyramid is clear within that story as well. And so that's what we're kind of going to draw from here. So after the exposition, there's the rising action. As the conflict builds, the plot thickens. Aristotle saw this as the entanglement or the tying of the knot. The hero faces uncertain future, creating anticipation and intrigue. Something bad happens. Something is looming. That there's the nothing, and it's coming to destroy
everything.
Fantasia or whatever it might be. Yeah. So after that, so you have the exposition, you have the rising action, and then once something happens that's very important, here's the climax. Here's the critical point, the moment of crisis when the conflict reaches its apex. There appears to be no reasonable way to resolve the matter. At this point, the audience is most deeply engaged and feeling the strain of the story's tension. The climax marks the turning point of the plot. Wow. Strike me down and I become more powerful than you can possibly imagine. Or, strike the emperor down. I will become more powerful than you possibly imagine, and you'll save your friends. No, I will not turn to the dark side. Oh, those different climaxes within this pyramid is again, just draw from Star Wars, but you can draw it from any historical one. The Count of the 300, the battle against Xerxes, and we shall fight in the shade, and they drove him to a stalemate, and King Leonidas is vastly outnumbered, and here comes the battle. Here's the climax of it.
Yeah, good. So he's kind of going through this. So this is called, again, Freytag's Pyramid, right? So we've seen the exposition, the rising action, right? Now it gets to this peak of climax that you just described. And now he says there's the falling action. And this moves the conflict toward resolution, he tells us. Whether satisfying resolution, right? They all lived happily ever after.
Right.
That's comedy. Or unsatisfying resolution, right? Where, and he calls that tragedy, obviously, right? And so he says, in Aristotle's language, it's the reversal at which the point of the knot starts to be untied. Right?
Yeah. Rocky wins the battle. Rocky loses the fight, but his character is shown in that, and then the sequels bring out his rebuilding and restructure and battling against Mr. T or Ivan Drago or whoever it might be. So.
Yeah. So he says, in some cases, an unexpected twist in the plot catches the audience off guard. In some cases, a grand epiphany, lights on the hero or on an important revelation is made, right?
Hans is the bad guy in Frozen.
Right. And so the resolution of the conflict or the causes the heroes to see matters as they truly are, right? For better or for worse, right? Yeah. So that's the falling action.
Right. So what do we do after we take our breath? Well, the denouement. Here comes the final unraveling of the action when the conflict is resolved, the knot finally untied. In the case of the comedy, all is made well. The happily ever after can begin in some fashion.
Right.
In the case of the tragedy, it is the final catastrophe that unfolds, but always with a moral lesson to be learned. Right. That's an important one. Again, Hamlet, everyone dies. Well, what does that mean? Why did everyone die? Romeo and Juliet, they take the poisons, stab the person, and then the families that were warring look at each other across the bodies of their dead children and say, is this what the stupid little squabble has gotten to us? And if they could love, why can't we love? Or if you could take that the other way and say, these stupid children, we're going to continue this war and we're going to become even more entrenched in our darkness. It's kind of left open-ended there as well. So that's why you spend a lot of money to take a literature classes to figure that out.
And so the question is, so what, right? Why go through this Freytag's pyramid? What does this have to do? How does this help us with regard to, storytelling and the problem of evil and that sort of thing? Well, he's getting there, right? He says, while the characteristic features of the monomyth, can be discovered in many shapes and sizes within its nucleus, there resides, he tells us, a single ubiquitous theme, right? And Brian Gadwa asserts that all storytelling is about, and here it is, redemption, right? The recovery of something lost or the attainment of something needed. Stories are finally, centrally, crucially, primarily, mostly about redemption. So that's where he's headed with this, right?
Frozen, what's happening? Elsa, Anna's trying to redeem her sister. Anna has thrust herself behind the iron curtain of the doors for her entire adult life. Now she must rule, but no, she wants to escape. She has been untrue to herself, so she's trying to redeem herself. And then, of course, the main storyline of bad guys trying to take over kingdom and stuff like that. So, see, I have children. Thus, when it fails to materialize, every good story taps into the audience's natural longing for redemption. Like the structure of the monomyth itself, this nearly universal fixation with redemption is curious and defies explanation as a matter of some strange coincidence. Nor can it be explained by a slow accretion of literary and cultural consensus. Literary and cultural consensus. Since the global history of storytelling shows that consistently compatible monomythic tales have existed in various times, places, and culture in complete isolation from one another. So here's a like 2 + 2 = 4, like the stone is on top of the mountain and it's not on top of the mountain is true. These things are true no matter who you are, in whatever capacity, whatever time, whatever place.
And they're found in all cultures, all across the country, all geographic locations. Right.
Yeah. Like pyramids. Yeah. Literary critics have therefore been uniformly puzzled about the origins of the monomyth.
So it's found everywhere, and yet there's, even some isolated areas have these types of things that haven't been, affected by other folks. And so how did this happen? Well, it says Christian literary critics have not suffered from this uncertainty about how this happened, right? The idea form of the monomyth is the comedy that reflects a U-shaped plot line, he tells us. Thus, undoubtedly points us to the U-shaped storyline reflected in the grand narrative of Scripture.
Right.
Creation, fall, redemption, right?
We just have a lot big fall in the middle there.
So it says that Barr tells us that all great art contains elements of the true story. The story of the good creation, the fallen world, and the longing for redemption.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's.
Yeah, we even within good art, still life art through the ages, there has been kind of drawing on these divine themes of painting pictures or depicting people in certain reposes that are, you're like, oh, that person's outstretched like Christ, and so here's the person sacrificing themselves for their family or for this art picture that they're self drawing, and Brandon Routh's Superman has those big in your face Messiah myth ideas to draw your mind to this idea of Superman's like Jesus because he's this otherworldly person who's coming to Earth. He's sacrificing himself for humanity that he's a part of but not a part of, and so it's drawing on those very heavily handed. It doesn't have to be that in your face, but it makes for a good example. So
yeah.
It's good for something. What about the monomyth and a general revelation? How do we make sense that this universal apprehension of monomythic themes? General or natural revelation indicates that God has embedded certain limited truths within creation and within the impulses of his image-bearing creatures. So I think we talked about this with Kostenberger's book, and I think we talked about it here as well, is that we're image-bearing creatures, and part of that is, why should we expect God to be a storyteller? Well, in the same way that we also are storytellers. It hits at home. It develops a tug on your heartstrings, a tug on your mind. It embeds in yourself because you're hearing a story that has kind of universal hook points.
Yeah, and so we're storytellers because God's a storyteller.
Right. So this image-bearing factor, one of the image-bearing qualities is storytelling. We're image-bearing creatures who seek meaning for their fractured lives. We read, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Yeah. So Psalm 19:1.
And so Bavnik, the theologian.
Herman Bavnik, the great Bavnik.
He writes, all the elements and forms that are essential to religion, a concept of God, a sense of guilt, a desire for redemption, sacrifice, priesthood, temple, cult, prayer, etc., though corrupted, he tells us, nevertheless do also occur in pagan religion.
Yeah.
Right? Here and there, even unconscious predictions and striking expectations of a better and pure religion are voiced, he tells us. Hence, Christianity is not only positioned antithetically, right, against paganism, but he says it's also paganism's fulfillment.
Romans 1. What happens? They don't devoid themselves of understanding and worship. They replace the image of the holy God with images of man and creepy things and all sorts of things. The worship aspect in that is also seen in the storytelling. It's replacing the high thing, the thing that they're worshiping themselves, or a physical idol that's going to bring them blessing. And it draws on the parallels of a desire for God, a desire for communion, a desire for what the image bearer is supposed to be reflecting in the world. And again, I don't want to draw this too much so that you get sick of it, but G.K. Beale's God Dwells Among Us, that idea of here's the temple as seen in the garden, the tent of meetings, the Temple Mount, Christ, the church, and the end times. Again, that's a monomyth of what God is drawing out from this overlying aspect that he is saying, look, I'm mirroring it in certain areas so that you have in your mind, this is important. Why? Because I'm at the center. I'm important. The heavens declare God's glory, and the earth is his footstool. Where is he at? He's situated right in the middle.
Right.
He's right there in the midst. He's right there among the priest, and the priest brings the people in. There's Christ. All these things that is drawn out in that book is what we're talking about here as well. But also, pagans are stealing it. Thus, pagan mythic worldviews have at least some perception of the original state of reality, creation. What went wrong with the original state, the fall, and the longing to recover or return to the original state, and that's redemption. So again, when Jordan Peterson talks about this, he does it from this kind of pagan aspect. He's saying, what can we draw from what we know as God's meta-narrative, and how can we apply it to us? And so he's always kind of navel-gazing at it. And what can this inform us about man? It's just the opposite way. What can man and our story inform us about God, and how we can remember things through this story dwelling and this kind of three version arc of creation, the fall, and redemption.
Yeah. And so, so there's an issue here, right? General revelation can only point us to redemptive longing, but it cannot deliver the knowledge of true redemption, right?
Romans 1.
We need special revelation, right? And so Rinken, he quotes here, says that the fatal problem with a non-biblical worldview is that fragments of truth, goodness, and beauty that are perceived can never be assembled into a cohesive picture of God's world. The best that non-Christian worldviews may include are, the truth, or at least some of it, but those random truths will never reveal the scope of God's saving plan. Every attempt to fill up the vacuum that exists in the human heart leads either to blissful ignorance, right, or to frustration, misery, and cynicism. And we see this. He reminds us in the Solomon's Ecclesiastes, right?
Yeah. So the search for true redemption requires a different set of lenses that were not supplied to us upon entry into this world. And, at least from the books that I read, sci-fi, there's always a longing towards something that will save us. Aliens, technology, the unification of man, the point in which humanity and machines become one, enlightenment, whatever that might be, where we shirk off our mortal coil and we're just energy beings that commune with the universe. That's what's kind of always being longed for there. The source of universal storyline is fully and accurately disclosed not only in God's specific and special revelation, and we require a new nature to see it. I wonder how that happens. The biblical worldview supplies the world with the source of these monomythic themes, but when the true nature of redemption, that is the one true story that we're going to get into, is brought to the fore of the world's attention, it is rejected in favor of lesser stories and more palpable ideologies. Well, look at Jesus. He's just like Horus or Anubis or, pick your one. Well, okay, let's even grant that that's true. Those stories, where do they all come from, and how do they have that similar nature that we're saying, here's the story of Jesus Christ within in Jerusalem at the time of the cross, that people witnessed, that people wrote about, that aren't these true mythic characters. Where do they come from? Now, when you look at those stories and you realize that you have to draw religious words in order to read into the text of those true myths, this person had 12 disciples. Well, no, they had many disciples they talked about there. And so they're brought to the forefront of the world's attention. They're rejected and they're replaced, which again is what Romans 1 is talking about there as well.
Exactly. And so he tells us that nonetheless, the universal plot structure, the monomyth, right, as ascertained in the history of our storytelling, gives ample and unassailable testimony to God's revealed truth, even if that testimony is insufficient to bring genuine redemption to bear on tragic souls, right? In other words, general revelation reveals this. People capture it, but it's not enough to get them to God, right? Obviously, you need the special revelation of the gospel and the scriptures, right? And so he says to adapt to, an Augustinian phrase, our stories will fill our hearts with restlessness until we find our rest in God's story. Mm-hmm. That's what he's getting at. And so it is in that story, God's story, that conflict, crisis, the fall, the broad problem of evil finds its only satisfactorily, resolution for us, right? And so that's the story he says that we need to examine, the one true story, right?
Yeah. So what was the point of talking about that? Well, it's to set up the framework of talking about the source of this monomyth, and Christians are obviously going to point to the redemption arc of humanity. So that's what we're going to be covering next time, and for a couple understandings of, I don't quite get what's been talked about in these past couple episodes. A couple movies that I can recommend. One with Jimmy Stewart and John Wayne called "The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance." Talks about this. When myth becomes the story, when myth becomes reality, print the legend. And there's a good kind of college documentary type done with comedy, and it's pretty entertaining from Robert Wool, who was in Good Morning Vietnam, called "Assume the Position with Mr. Wool," and that helps break it down from a historical point of view and saying, here are these stories that capture our attention. Now, negative things are brought into it, and he brings those out, like the writing of Paul Revere, but then there's this other man called Israel Bithell who did way more than Paul Revere did, but Paul Revere had the story written about him. Why is that the case? So those are the kind of two movies, if you want to check them out, that kind of talk about this a little bit more. But ultimately, we're going to talk about the meta-narrative, and that'll be the Gospel of Redemption in chapter 11 of Scott Christian's book, What About Evil? That will hopefully you'll join us next time and continue reading. So thanks for joining us.
Yep, we'll see you next time.